Hi there, folks. I am back with an Easter list for you. Now, some of you might have noticed there was no video last week. That was because I had another cold. It's a little bit unfair having another cold two colds within 3 months, but there you are. So there was no video last week because A, I didn't have the energy, and B, I didn't have the voice. And you don't want to see me sniffling and sneezing through a video. Nobody wants to see that. So I am back with the Easter list. What are my themes for an Easter list? Well, it was quite difficult to decide what books to choose for Easter because I've already done a spring list and I didn't want to repeat myself. And of course, Easter is basically, if you take away the Christian festival, the original pagan festival was a celebration of the spring equinox. So kind of done that. So I was thinking about what people might want to read during the Easter holidays. If you have a holiday, if you have a few days off at Easter, and we quite often have family with us. So I was thinking along those lines. So I've chosen a few different themes for Easter. I hope you agree with my choices. I hope that I bring up some books that you really would like to read at Easter. So let's get started without any more rambling on from me. Now, my first book, it's not particularly sort of Easter or spring flavoured book, if you like, but it is a book in a way about rebirth, about coming of age and sort of growing to maturity, which kind of has a sort of spring theme to it. And of course, as I usually do, I started with the earliest published book, and this is Charles Dickens, and it's Great Expectations. Now, I did mention this book, I think, in autumn for autumn reading because of that wonderful opening with the Kent marshes and that very, very spooky scenery of those marshes at night and the criminal Magwitch coming up out of the dark. But I've chosen it for spring because the main character of Pip, when we first meet him, he's a child and he's an innocent, he's naive, and he lives with his older sister, and Joe, his brother-in-law, is a lovely character. And a few years later, he is invited to this very strange house with the very wealthy spinster called Mrs. Havisham and her adopted daughter, Estelle. And Mrs. Havisham is one of Dickens's classic characters. She was jilted at the altar many, many years ago, and she has not changed anything since that day and lives in this bitter world of the past. And it's a very, very strange experience for Pip. But then later on, he discovers that he has been left an inheritance and has great expectations to inherit some wealth. And he believes that it comes from Mrs. Havisham. And what this does, and the reason I've chosen this for Easter and for this kind of rebirth is coming of age theme, is because Pip goes through a kind of process of growing up. He starts out, when he realizes he has these great expectations, he kind of loses that integrity, that innocence that he had as a child for a while, and he becomes a little pompous, and he starts to look down on dear old Joe, his older brother-in-law. And so he has to go through some more experiences to then actually learn about himself and to be humbled, really, and move into a more mature adult. So it's a wonderful book about that kind of process of becoming a sort of more a mature human being, really. And I love it. I think it's one of my favourite Dickens. So if you haven't read Great Expectations, then maybe now is the time. If you like books about the development of character, and there are great other themes in it, such as social classes, of course, redemption, the pressures that wealth or expected wealth puts on people, particularly in the age this was set in, the idea of good breeding and all those things that are very much part of Dickens' society that he likes to comment on. So, great book. And it was published, if I didn't mention it before, it was first published in 1861. Now, my next book I absolutely had to include, although I don't have a copy, and pictures should be up on your screens now, is Credo by Melvyn Bragg. Now, if you don't know who Melvyn Bragg is, I think people in the UK will, but if you don't know who he is, Melvyn Bragg was a broadcaster in England, probably best known for presenting the programme called The South Bank Show, which ran in the 80s, 90s and early 21st century. So it was quite a big show for quite a long time. And he's also presented programmes on Radio 4. And of course, he is also a writer. He's written both fiction and non-fiction. I've read 3 of his books and they are really, really good, all historical. He's also, just a bit more information about him, he's chairman of the Arts Council Literature Panel, vice president of the Friends of the British Library, and president of the National Academy of Writing. He's a highly intelligent and knowledgeable man. I always really liked him. And I read Credo, well, it's quite a few years ago. It was published in 1996. It's set in the Dark Ages and it tells the story of a semi-mythical person called St. Bega. After she is not allowed to marry the person she wants to, she vows celibacy and she actually founds a nunnery. Now, the reason I've chosen this as an Easter book is very, very strongly got a very Easter theme in it, because one of the features in the book is the Synod of Whitby, which was a Christian administrative gathering held in the year 664 in Northumbria that actually calculated the dates and times of Easter in the Christian calendar, and that features very, very largely in this book. I enjoyed it. Some people have said it's rather long. Fiction set in the Dark Ages doesn't come along very often because we don't have a lot of information about the Dark Ages, and that it's always interesting, I think, to read books set sort of in that time during the Anglo-Saxon period. If you're interested in reading books set in that period, then I would definitely recommend this. And particularly if you want to look at books around the history of Easter, then this might be the book for you to read. Now, if there is ever a book that you really should read at Easter, if you haven't read it before, is this. It's Chocolat by Joanne Harris. And of course, we love to eat chocolate at Easter, so that is a good theme for it. But it is also, the book starts during a period of Lent and leads up to the Easter period. So it is also a very good Easter themed book as well. Probably a lot of you have seen the film, but I do recommend reading the book as well. It was published in 1999 and it tells the story of Vianne Rocher and her daughter Anouk, and she arrives in a French village and sets up a chocolaterie during the traditional period of fasting during Lent, and completely outrages the local priest and other members of the society. She shakes up this village and is pitted against a lot of prejudice and anger. But there is more to this book than that, because there is a magical quality to this book and to all Joanne Harris's writing. Vianne has this ability to find the perfect chocolate for each person, and it's almost kind of spiritual. And of course, also there is a sensuality of the descriptions of the chocolate in the book that is an absolute delight to read. And the book leads up to the festival on Easter Sunday. So very, very topical for Easter. If you haven't read it, this is a perfect book to read for Easter. And it's just very interesting to see how she manages to involve herself in the lives of the mostly elderly people in this village who are very set in their ways. It's just it really is a lovely book, and I actually really like the sequel to this book called The Lollipop Shoes. In fact, I liked that one even more. I found it even more magical, slightly darker too. So great one for Easter, chocolat. My next choice, published in 2002, is The Lovely Bones by Alice Sebold. Now, this might seem a strange choice for Easter. It begins with a rather startling couple of sentences. My name was Salmon, like the fish. First name, Susie. I was 14 when I was murdered on December the 6th, 1973. That is definitely an opening line to get you interested. Basically, The Lovely Bones is narrated by a girl who is raped and murdered on her way home from school, but she is still around, and she watches her family, her devastated family, deal with her death and the attempt to find out who the murderer was. Why have I chosen this for Easter? Well, one of the themes of Easter, we might say, is resurrection and everlasting life. So although The Lovely Bones is by no means a religious novel, and the author herself said it wasn't intended to be religious, she does believe in life continuing after death. And this is basically why this book, although it sounds like it's a horribly dark theme, is actually a book about hope and redemption. And she takes a terrible, tragic event and turns it into, something that gives people hope. So I think it's a great book to read, actually, if you've ever lost somebody. It's very, very moving as well. She deals with the way the family have to deal with her murder and move on, because the book takes place over several years. So the family are sort of having to gradually come to terms with her death and move on. And of course, she has to watch them all, knowing who her murderer was. And that's another interesting part of the story. An interesting subject, a very unique subject. This was recommended to me by my best friend, who absolutely loved it, and I loved it too. So I do recommend that as a book with a tragic story, but a book about hope. Look, I've been joined by Tilly. Don't yawn, it's not that boring. There's my little girl. There we go. So, what are we looking at next? Well, my next book is on the theme of family, because family is a pretty good theme for Easter, because It's one of those kind of holidays where you've probably got kids at home for the Easter holidays. Where are you going? Okay, there's no biscuits up here. No biscuits up here. And you may or may not be on holiday yourself. And it's not often, particularly in the UK, it's not often really a holiday where you go away on holiday. So you're probably at home with the kids, with the family, or you might be gathering to have an Easter dinner or something. So I thought books about family would be a good idea. Now, one writer who wrote so well about family and family relationships, and you just don't hear much about her these days. Oh, bye-bye. Joanna Trollope. So I've chosen one of her books with... Well, don't start grumbling now you've got down. I've chosen The Other Family. Now, I loved Joanna Trollope. Now, she was a very prolific writer. The first novel that really brought her to the public eye was The Choir, published in 1987. This is much later. This one was published in 2010. Yeah. She wrote a lot of books in that period, right through from the 80s, 90s and the noughties. Very, very much all on themes of family. And I ate these books up, and so did my mother, and so did my best friend. Could not get enough of them at the time, I remember. In fact, one of my bookshelves downstairs, half a shelf is devoted to Joanna Trollope books. So I don't know really why we don't hear much about her anymore. And even when you look at, I looked the other day at books about family, her name didn't even come up, which was really surprising. So I don't really know why that is. Still writing. The last book was published in 2020. The last book I read of hers was The Soldier's Wife, I think, which was published in 2012. She is just so good at getting into difficult family relationships, children, husbands and wives. This one, it's called The Other Family. At the opening of the book, the main character's husband has just passed away, and they had 3 children. They'd been very happy. But as it says on the back, let's just read this. The one big fact she had always tried to keep from her daughters threatens to overwhelm them all. For Richie had still been married to his first wife, the one with a son that he had abandoned in Newcastle. Go. We've got a will, money. There are 2 families that are going to have to come together. So a very interesting and compelling subject, I think. And she does this kind of thing so well. So if you want a book around the theme of family at Easter, then I do recommend Joanna Trollope. I've picked this one. It's got family in the title, but you could pick any of her books, really. A Village Affair, A Passionate Man, The Rector's Wife, the ones I've read, Marrying the Mistress. They are all really good reads, and ones that you just read. I've always found you just read really quickly. They're really good page turners. Joanna Trollope, The Other Family. My next book, published in 2013, is The Midnight Rose by Lucinda Riley. I can't for the life of me remember why I chose this for Easter, but the description of it on the Waterstones website says it's a spellbinding tale of family secrets, sacrifice, and the everlasting power of love. So I suppose those are vaguely Eastery themes, and it's also about family. It's a time slip novel. It's historical. Let me just read the back. It's a long time ago since I read it. It's quite a chunky read. Spanning 4 generations, The Midnight Rose sweeps from the glittering palaces of the great Maharajas of India to the majestic stately homes of England, and follows the extraordinary life of Anahita Chavan from 1911 to the present day. So the 11-year-old Anahita forms a friendship with Princess Indira and becomes her companion. They come to England just before the First World War. She meets and falls in love with Donald Astbury, the heir to the Astbury estate. We also skip to 80 years later with Rebecca Bradley, a promising American film star who has to go to England to play a role set in Dartmoor, and comes to the Astbury Hall where the great-grandson of Anahita arrives, and they, between them, start to unravel the dark secrets of the Astbury family dynasty. So, fascinating premise, a good chunky book if you've got a lot of time over the Easter holidays and you just want a really good family saga time slip book to read, then that's a really good one. Now, a fairly recent book that I read, I think about a year ago, is Kate Moss, The City of Tears, published in 2021. I've chosen this for Easter because it has very much religious history theme, and it is also about family as well. I really like Kate Moss's works. They are big books, and she writes fiction set in medieval France. This one is set in the 16th century, and it's around during the period of the religious wars. The main event, the central event of the book is the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre in 1572. Thousands of Protestant Huguenots were massacred in Paris and across France. And this book tells the story of a family that were particularly affected by that whole event. They have travelled to Paris, and on that day, or I think the day before that event takes place, their daughter goes missing in Paris, and when things start to kick off, they have to leave and they cannot find their daughter and they have to leave without her. And it's absolutely heart-wrenching, but it tells the story of what happened. There are, as well as the religious wars, there are family enemies. I rather liked what the Guardian review of this book said: fake news, propaganda and leaders whipping up a mob against the government are nothing new. Frequently, the novel offers uncanny echoes of current headlines. It's about prejudice. It's about how national events, these kind of events that we hear about, how it affects an individual family, just one family. She is an amazing writer, and she gets right into that period of history so well. I've read a couple of her other books, Labyrinth and Sepulchre, both excellent books set around Carcassonne in France. Yeah, if you like historical fiction, particularly fiction set in France or in the sort of late medieval period, then this is a really, really good one. So if you've not read Kate Moss before, then I do recommend her for books around those subjects. Now, that's it for my adult books. But I did think, because you might have family around, you might have kids around, I thought I would just quickly mention a couple of classic children's books. I am not up to date on modern children's books, so forgive me if I don't really do modern day or recent children's books. But if your kids have not read either of these books, then maybe now is the time to introduce them. And of course, I could say, and a really good book with a kind of Easter theme would be The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe. Of course, because if you've read it, you will know that there is a lot of Christian symbolism in it. And as I said before, you don't have to be a Christian to appreciate it, but it does have that chapter where Aslan the lion sacrifices himself in order to save Edmund, who, to use a phrase from another genre, has gone to the dark side, and of course is resurrected and comes back to life again. So you can see where the Easter symbolism lies in The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe. But if your kids have not read the Chronicles of Narnia, then I would really, really suggest that they start reading those books. Maybe Easter is a good time for them, and you should start with The Magicians Nephew. This, I think, is another really lovely book to read in spring or at Easter because it tells the story of the beginning of C.S. Lewis's magical world of Narnia. And there is a beautiful chapter in it where Aslan the lion creates Narnia, and you see it springing to life, and it's so gorgeous and beautiful, and all the animals that have come to be and start talking, and I think it's lovely for spring because it is like a kind of spring. It's a spring of Narnia itself, and so I think that's a lovely book to read in spring, and it's the first in the history of Narnia. Obviously, it's the creation of Narnia. So if you're going to read the whole of the Narnia Chronicles, then that is the one to start with. And of course, you might want to read them as an adult as well. Absolutely, why not? And just the other one I thought I'd mention, if your children have not read this, I thought, why not at Easter, at spring, read a book about setting off on an unexpected adventure. Yes, you know what I'm talking about. And it's The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. And I've just chosen this as a great classic book to read for kids at Easter. If you're looking around for something for your kids to do, get into The Hobbit, get into J.R.R. Tolkien, and maybe later on they can read Lord of the Rings as well. I think just a great spring book for just, a new beginning, an adventure, setting off on a journey. Why not? No particular reason, just because I haven't mentioned The Hobbit for a long time. Why not mention it now? And of course, we could also talk about spring books set in spring. Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, The Wind in the Willows, Anne of Green Gables, Secret Garden. There are plenty of really great books, that children's books, to be read in spring. So I hope that's given you a few ideas, both for you and for any kids in your family, to read at Easter if you're looking for something to see you through the Easter holidays. And probably won't be another video this week, so I do hope you all have a lovely Easter, whatever you are doing. If you're spending it with family, or if you're going away, or if you're staying at home, have a lovely time, eat lots of chocolate, and I will see you again very soon. Bye for now.